Hey, greetings everyone. It is GleeCon, here again, bringing you another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we took Maleficent, Millie, the Frost Mage, and we continued traipsing around the wetlands, mostly killing... we killed a lot of Dragon Maw orcs, and then we pivoted and went and got some of the crocolisks that we needed, to the giant ones, and then we did some ghost killing. And we still have a little bit of each left. We still have to wrap up some of the ghost stuff and wrap up some of the orc stuff before we hit the Thandal span couple of neat quests at the tippity top. So we are possibly within one episode of finishing that zone. We've also been reading through War of the Scaleborn, and I believe we have around 4 chapters to go. In the last 2, they were very short, but they kind of set up little pieces of things that Iridikron is doing. So he's entrenched himself in Harrow's Deep. He has made it a shifting, dangerous maze full of traps and whatever allies he has left. He's kind of struck a tenuous deal with the Jarradine, and the young ordered dragons who had went over to his size have been rescued a few chapters back, and now they have been capturing ordered dragons to use as sort of hostages on their own, so that Neltharion can't, in his own turn, collapse the underground thing. So he's kind of trying to take, since Neltharion and he are the Earth Masters, we're setting it up to where Neltharion's powers are sort of handcuffed, where Iridikron can go full bore. So stay a while and listen as we see, as we really get closer and closer, and maybe even start the official climax itself in chapter 26. Alexstrasza landed on an icy summit in the Sawtooth Mountains, bristling, watching Warbringer Rava and her forces fall back to Harrow's Deep. Iridikron's deep keep towered over the peaks of every other mountain in the range, a singular snow-capped behemoth that speared the sky. The sunset turned its tip blood red. A large valley stretched out below her, looking like a gash in the world's scaly hide. Neltharion's earthen bulwark swept past her in pursuit, chasing the primalists away from the southern ridge. I just had a fear. The ruby flamebringers brought up the rear while the rest of the Aspect's forces halted at the Dragon Queen's signal. This was far enough for tonight. They could use the ridge for protection while they summoned the other Aspects and mustered the remainder of their forces for the siege. After so many centuries of war, the sight of Harrow's Deep filled Alexstrasza with a mixture of fury and dread. She knew Iridikron would not come and meet the Aspects on the field. If they wanted to stop him, they would have to descend into the mountain's depths and wrest him out. One incarnate could not hope to face 5 Aspects, but Alexstrasza doubted the stone scale had been idle all these years. No doubt Iridikron would try to trap the Aspects under that horrible mountain, just as the Aspects had trapped the other incarnates in the vault. Neltharion landed beside her, taking stock of the mountain. "Long have I wanted to set eyes on Harrow's Deep," he said. "My shadow scales say the tunnels never stop shifting, turning the keep into an endless, ever-changing labyrinth. We've lost more than one good dragon in those depths." Alexstrasza let out a measured, steady breath. "I assume you have a plan to deal with the tunnels." It's putting a lot of trust and confidence in your lieutenant, your partner, but your second in command. Really, you'd have to consider Neltharion like number 2. "I have half a mind to fill Iridikron's warrens with molten stone, or crack the earth and drop the mountain on his head," the Earth Warder replied, his armor creaking as he gave his wings a pert shake. "But you won't allow that, will you?" "I must have proof of his capture or death," Alexstrasza said. "I will not risk him escaping, only to bring war to the Broodlands once more with greater force." "Then we must risk the descent," Neltharion said with a tilt of his head. "Once we're inside, the Black Dragonflight will keep our path secure, though I cannot be sure how effective our stone wards will be in Iridikron's keep." "Do we know the location of his lair?" Alexstrasza asked, sweeping her gaze over the peaks. "Or does that move as well?" "As far as we know, it is only the tunnels that move, but no Shadowscale has ever seen the inside of Iridikron's war cavern." "Very well," she replied. "Let us summon the other Aspects from Valdrakken. Once they arrive, we will call a war council and decide how to deal with the stone scale. Neltharion departed, calling orders for watches to be established and portals to be prepared. Alexstrasza stood on the ridge alone till the shadows flooded the spaces between the mountain peaks, unable to look away from Harrow's Deep's cruel peak. How long had she dreamed of this moment? She should feel exultant, triumphant, but the closer Alexstrasza had drawn to Iridikron's lair, the more Viranoth's final words to Alexstrasza tortured the Dragon Queen. "Why didn't you keep your promise to me?" Viranoth's words echoed in Alexstrasza's memory and gnawed on her heart, leaving a cold emptiness there. Why was your promise to the Keepers so much more important to you? Those words still stung. Perhaps not to the side of Alexstrasza, who is Dragon Queen, Lifebinder, and Red Aspect. That part of her understood why her oath to the Titans took precedence, for the safety of Azeroth hung in the balance. But Alexstrasza the Dragon, the mother, the sister, the friend, cried out from the deepest depths of her soul, burdened with the pain and regret of failing her oldest friend. Now all Alexstrasza wanted to do was end this war and bury its horrors under stone forever. She would not apologize for all that had happened, but she certainly regretted that she might never have the chance to melt Viranoth's frozen heart. Moreover, she swore not to repeat past mistakes, to listen more and hide less. A flutter of wings made Alexstrasza turn. Sarastraz alighted behind her, dipping his head. "I am sorry to interrupt you, my queen, but the other aspects have arrived." "I will join them at once," Alexstrasza replied, turning away from the mountain as it fell into darkness. Before the sun rose again, the flights would marshal for war. Sarastraz led Alexstrasza to an area that had been hastily hollowed out from the mountainside, expanding on a set of abandoned caves near the southern ridge. Outside, the Blues had maintained large, glimmering shields. Glowing portals from Vakthros allowed hundreds of fresh wings to join them from the Broodlands. The Bronze wove time enchantments around the camp, preventing the enemy from taking them unawares. The Reds organized the Draconid, while the Black Dragonflight built camps and constructed artillery with the Greens. Alexstrasza swooped into the area, carved from gray stone, landing just inside its mouth. The air warmed by several degrees. In a large central chamber, Neltharion and the other aspects gathered about a stone map that depicted the Dragon Wilds with Harrow's Deep at its center. Major domos and flight leaders filled the cavern, and every head bowed as the Dragon Queen entered. Their scales gleamed with the light thrown from the makeshift braziers. "To those of you joining us tonight, I bid you welcome," Alexstrasza said, rounding the other aspects and taking her place at the head of the map. She exchanged a tired smile with Ysera, then nodded to Malygos and Nosdormu. She looked to Neltharion first as she said, "It has been many years since we have fought on the same front as one. Tomorrow we shall bring an end to a conflict that has sought to shatter our flights, raise our homeland, and break our sacred oaths." Trumpets, calls, and roars accompanied her words. Though grateful for their support, the Dragon Queen lifted a wing, asking for silence. "Iridikron's forces have been on the run for months now." Alexstrasza turned her gaze to the campaign map below, gesturing to it with a sweep of her talons. She took the pawns for Warbringer Rava and Uxoria and moved them to the keep. "Though the Primalists maintain greater numbers, they will not be able to stand against 5 aspects and their flights. Iridikron knows this, which is why I believe the true battle will be fought in the depths of Harrow's Deep." Alexstrasza set the stone-scaled pawn on the keep. She swore the stone trembled beneath it. Malygos made a small humming noise in his throat, thinking, "I worry Iridikron will not be in Harrow's Deep at all. We cannot go inside that mountain, for he may drop it on our heads." "Harrow's Deep is a trap, of that I have no doubt." Alexstrasza moved the aspect's glittering pawns to the southern ridge. "But if we are to put an end to this war, we must capture him." "I agree with Alexstrasza on this point," Neltharion said. "Iridikron will not leave Harrow's Deep. Crafty as he may be, he believes himself the most capable strategist on the field. Like the others, his arrogance will be his downfall." The Earth Warder ran a talon from the Obsidian Citadel to Wormrest Temple, saying, "The Primalist tactics in the Dragon Wilds have been irregular, seeking only to hold us at bay. In recent days we have gained more territory with greater speed. I believe the Stone-Scaled has finished his preparations to receive us, which is why he has allowed us to approach his keep with such haste.
Have we any idea of what he might be planning?
Ysera asked, looking to Nosdormu. The bronze aspect shook his head.
The warrens of Harrow's Deep are vast and ever-moving. It is impossible to know how they will shift. All I can see in the time-ways is Iridikron, standing at the heart of the world in a quaking chamber of stone.
Charming, Malygos replied. Alexstrasza moved pawns across the map for the dragonflights as well as their Draconid.
He will not be able to trap us underground. We will establish a portal chamber here.
She tapped the area they stood in.
And leave a complement of dragons to defend it.
That allows the blues to evacuate, but what of the other flights? Malygos asked, rubbing his chin with a talon. I can send blues with every company, but we should have contingency plans in the event of separation or loss of the mages.
Can you enchant a stone or a scale that will allow us to return to a predetermined location?
Alexstrasza asked. That sounds like the flight power you get that's kind of like Nosdormu's power.
Perhaps,
Malygos said, narrowing his eyes and counting their forces on the map. But I will not be able to make enough for all by the morn. There are more than 1,000 dragons with us, not including Cezanne's and his frost scales.
We won't be taking 1,000 dragons into Harrow's Deep,
Alexstrasza replied, moving the aspect's pawns north across the field to the keep.
No more than 100 will descend into the depths with us.
You don't intend to take an army into Harrow's Deep? Malygos asked her, then glanced sideways at Neltharion. Is that wise? The Earth Warder inclined his head. We have kept careful count of their numbers. Iridikron will send every dragon to meet us on the field tomorrow, perhaps hoping to exhaust us before we descend into the keep.
We will use the bulk of our forces to shatter Warbringer Rava's front lines, while Cezanne's flanks her from the north, Alexstrasza said, moving Cezanne's pawns down from the frozen fangs. They scraped along the stone board. Once the primalists fall into disarray, the frost scales will scatter them to the winds. Our flights will secure the outside of the keep, while each aspect takes a strike force inside.
Ysera shifted her weight, nervous.
That's all very well, but how do we locate the Stone-Scaled inside an endless maze of subterranean tunnels? That would be a challenging feat even if they were not in constant motion.
We follow the quakes, Neltharion said. I believe the Black Dragonflight will be able to triangulate his location, based on the seismic waves moving through the cavern's rocks. This is madness, Malygos said, pressing one of his digits into his temple. Are you certain you can't bring every Scalesmith in your flight and shatter the mountain range entire, Neltharion? The Earth Warder grinned at the idea, but before he could reply, Alexstrasza lifted her voice.
No, we cannot allow him a chance to escape. For the atrocities Iridikron the Stone-Scaled has inflicted upon dragonkind, he shall take his place in the vault of the incarnates. By wing and by talon, I will see this done. The assembled dragons murmured Alexstrasza's final words as rose in a quiet, determined chorus in the cavern.
My queen, a voice called out. Alexstrasza lifted her head. Agnion, leader of the Shadow Scale, stepped forward. There was news from Wyrmrest Temple just before this council convened. It may have some relevance to this discussion. Scales sparked as everyone turned their heads in Agnion's direction, and the assembly fell silent.
You have the floor, Agnion, Alexstrasza said, squaring her shoulders.
The flight leader drew a breath.
Over the last few days, more than 30 dragons and drakes have been kidnapped from patrols around Wyrmrest Temple. My Shadow Scales believe the victims are being moved underground to Harrow's Deep by an allied force of Jaradine and Primalist sympathizers.
Alexstrasza narrowed her eyes, a flame of fury kindling in her chest.
Iridikron is working with the Jaradine? She asked with a hiss. With dragon killers? What use would the Stone-Scaled have of prisoners?
Ysera asked, looking to Neltharion, then to Alexstrasza.
Do you think he means to kill them?
I am certain Iridikron intends to use them as a shield, Neltharion said, drumming his talons on the floor. He knows Alexstrasza would never allow the Black Dragonflight to crush Harrow's Deep if she believes there are prisoners of war inside.
He is not wrong about that,
Alexstrasza said through her teeth. She would not drop Harrows Deep on Iridicron's head at the cost of innocent lives, not even to win the day.
Can the Shadow Scales find where our kin are being held? She looked from Agnion to Neltharion.
We will do everything within our power to locate them,
the Earth Warder replied.
Good, Alexstrasza said, turning to the blue aspect. Malagos, can I leave the portal chamber in its defense to you?
Of course, he said, dipping his head. The Dragon Queen blew out a hot breath, considering the board.
Very well. This news informs our strategy, but it does not change it. Prepare for battle. We strike at dawn.
As the hour grew late, Alexstrasza lingered in the Grand Cavern with Neltharion, unable to sleep. She paced back and forth, muttering to herself, while the Earth Warder lounged beside the war map. He tapped the end of his tail on the floor, the only sign that he was as anxious for the dawn as she. The other aspects had retired hours ago. Ysera had offered to sprinkle dust from the dream over Alexstrasza's eyes, but the Dragon Queen declined. Tonight 100 worries picked at her mind like hungry birds. She was not used to facing the unknown on the battlefield. She had always been able to see her enemy's talons and teeth while fighting in the Dragon Wilds and in the Reach, but tomorrow she would send her best and bravest into the unknown depths of Harrows Deep. Not even Neltharion's shadow scales could say what dangers they would face in those tunnels, nor where the missing members of their flights were hidden in the deep. Most of all, Alexstrasza worried that she and Neltharion had failed to foresee important elements of the Stone Scales' plans. The Primalists could not hope to stand against the 5 aspects united, and yet Warbringer Rava's forces camped at the mountain's feet and slept as if they would not face the Dragonflight's combined wrath on the morrow. Oxoria's brood had disappeared into Ares scattered across the mountains, while Virak, the leader of Iridicron's last company of Rock Furies, had taken the high position on the mountain's sub-summit. The Primalists had 2 advantages, numbers and the home front. Once Cezanne's Frost Scales joined the battle, the Primalist power would be whittled down. Iridicron might see his forces as pawns, but Alexstrasza refused to believe he hadn't left the Primalists with a hidden 3rd advantage. But what, she wondered, what horrors had the Stone Scales saved for his last stand? Not even Neltharion could guess what awaited them on the morrow. The Earth Warder rolled Iridicron's pawn between his talons, slowly grinding it down to dust.
You are going to wear the floor smooth at this rate, my queen,
he observed of her pacing.
It is unlike you to worry so.
I can't help but go over every detail in my mind, Alexstrasza said, stalking past him for the 100th time. I think you are right. We will be best served sending the Heart's Guard to the center of the battlefield. They are fresher than the Iron Scales, and will be better equipped to handle Rava's tactics.
The Dragon Queen paused as the ground rumbled underfoot. With a frown, she turned her head to gauge Neltharion's reaction. The Earth Warder had his eyes closed, head cocked, listening to the groans of the deep earth. He took a breath, then, too, his expression unreadable. Then he crushed Iridicron's pawn in his talons. Springing to his feet, he said,
Iridicron moves to set off volcanic eruptions under Harrows Deep and its neighboring peaks. We must wake everyone now. We may be under attack.
A stony roar shattered the night. Tremors racked the cavern, splitting the floor and nearly sending Alexstrasza sprawling. Neltharion dug his talons into the rock for purchase. The pawns on the campaign table scattered, braziers wobbled and toppled, and waves of sparks crashed across the ground. Warning bugles filled the air. Together the 2 aspects rushed outside and leapt aloft. On the other side of the valley, Harrows Deep coughed great gouts of flame and ash into the skies. Magma crashed down the mountain's flank, spilling from the gaping wound in its summit. A second peak exploded, then a third. The explosions rocked the air and cast the whole of the battlefield in an eerie orange glow. The light threw the Primalist forms into silhouette as they locked ranks over the battlefield. Alexstrasza threw her head back and trumpeted to the sky. A long, commanding note, calling her flights to battle. The sound of her voice filled the valley, a warning and a challenge to the enemies of the Dragon Queen. The Iron Scales were the first to answer her call, having slept in their armor. 150 black dragons took to the skies, while Geryon carried the Earth Warder's armor to him.
We will hold them over the valley,
Neltharion said, sliding into his breastplate.
Come as soon as you can.
150 of you, Alexstrasza said, wide-eyed, against nearly 2,000.
I can give you 3 minutes. 5 if no storm can slow them down.
Neltharion said with a cheeky grin, then trumpeted 3 short blasts at the Iron Scales, who dived toward the mountain and tore hunks of flat rock from its summit.
Hurry!
The Jardine had dragged Layla Straza's cage into the depths of Iridikron's keep, wrapping her chains around a thick, unbreakable column of stone. In the low light, Layla Straza could barely make out the vast cavern around her. Water dripped from the ceiling's rocky fangs, pattering on her scales. The air was moist and smelled of mud and must. The only light came from the Jardine's torches and the large, sickly phosphorescent mushrooms growing in the darkness. Tyrannus and Rygos were chained nearby, almost close enough to touch. A bronze Dokul Dormu was shackled to a wall, along with a red Layla Straza had known from her work at the Ruby Life Pools, Ella Straza. The others lay unmoving, unconscious. Only a Tyrannus watched the shadows with apprehension, trembling. Before she had been hauled away, Layla Straza watched the Jardine lead at least 20 other dragons down different corridors. The dragons had disappeared into the shadows with their captors, fighting, trembling, or sobbing. The Jardine refused to tell the dragons what would become of them, nor could Layla Straza guess how much time had passed since they'd been captured. The growl of her stomach told her it had been at least a day, but without the sun, she couldn't say for sure. Layla Straza would never forgive Talon Straz, not so long as she lived. How could he leave her to die in the hands of enemies as nightmarish as the Jardine? He had to know that she and Amistraz had led the attack on Scalecracker Keep, delivering a crushing blow to Agira's forces. Why, if one of the Jardine happened to recognize her, they would kill her regardless of the Stone-Scale's plans. A rumble shivered through the floor. Tyrannus lifted his head.
What was that?
He asked.
Just an earthquake, she said gently.
The words were barely off her lips before the floor jolted so hard it sent Layla Straza tumbling head over tail into the wall behind them. The whole cavern trembled and groaned. Layla Straza pressed herself to the ground, looking left and right, while a Tyrannus buried his head under her wing. The air filled with the scents of sulfur and smoke. Grit tumbled from the roof in rocky streams. Magma oozed from cracks in the walls. The Jardine shouted orders at one another, their words indecipherable over the mountain's fury.
What's going on?
A Tyrannus shrieked over the earth's frantic cries. I don't know, Layla Straza replied. It might be a volcanic eruption.
Maybe it's the Black Dragonflight,
he cried.
Maybe they're going to collapse the mountain. Iridikron's down here, right? Maybe they'll just kill him and us too.
No, she said, shaking her head. They would never do that. Not while there are dragons trapped in the mountain. A Tyrannus lifted his head, his breathing shallow, panicked.
The aspects might not even know we're gone, Layla.
A stalactite shook loose and crashed into the ground nearby, startling them both. Layla Straza turned her face away as shrapnel needled her scales. The green whimpered. Someone will have noticed, she told him. Someone will have told them. We must trust in the Dragon Queen. She knows our names, a Tyrannus. She will not abandon us in our darkest hour. But the keep shook and shook and shook until Layla Straza thought a Tyrannus might be right. Perhaps the mountain would swallow them alive. It was hard to find hope in the confines of her chains, but the red radiated a little ruby light, if only to push back the shadows. Even if she died this day, she would not die in the darkness. She curled up to make herself as small as possible, trying to take courage. Iridikron's mountain would only rage if the aspects were on the offensive. Still, hours passed with no respite, and the red teetered on the verge of despair. A glimmer in the darkness drew Layla Straza's attention to a nearby curtain of flowstone. She shifted her head. The shadows shifted. With a growl, the red pushed to her feet, spreading her toes to give herself more stability as the ground shook. Who's there? She whispered, glancing sideways at the Jardine, who kept a lazy watch some 20 wing lengths away. The half-giants had chained the dragons to large columns of stone, but those same rocky features blocked their sightlines, too. A blue dragon appeared in a sizzle of arcane sparks, watching Layla Straza with a sharp, intelligent gaze. Layla Straza caught a gasp in her throat. The blue put a talon to her snout. Saragossa, the red whispered, feeling a flicker of hope kindle in her chest. What are you doing here? Rescuing you and the others unfortunates from Harrow's Deep, Saragossa said as she sidled closer. I can do nothing for the ones who slumber. We will have to hope that the Dragon Queen is successful in her campaign against Iridikron to save them. Do you know where my brother is? Layla Straza asked. Is he in the keep too? Saragossa cocked her head. Probably. He's been Iridikron's little errand whelp since the Dragon Queen defeated Virnoth. The blue tapped Layla Straza's collar, then did a little flourish with a talon. The lock slid open. With another furtive glance at the Jardine, Layla Straza slipped free, relishing her first unrestrained breath. That's a useful spell, the red whispered. Saragossa made a face. I know a lot of unsavory spells, fortunately or unfortunately. By now, Rygos and Atyrnus had awoken. Saragossa freed them from their collars, too. Together they slipped into a shadowy alcove nearby. Saragossa opened a glowing portal to the Aspect's camp. Rygos and Atyrnus slipped into the portal, thanking the blue, but Leylastraza hesitated. I can't go back, not if Talon is still here, she whispered. I must see him again, for I may never have another opportunity. If you are sure, you may come with me, the blue said, but you must listen to everything I say. Harrow's Deep is a dangerous place, and I'd rather you not be the death of us both. You have my word, the red said. Good, Saragossa replied. Let us hurry. We have more dragons to free. As the skies over Harrow's Deep burned, Alexstrasza leapt high in the air. Even with the support of the blue dragonflight, Neltharion and the Iron Scales could not hold back the Primalist's onslaught much longer. The front line bowed under the pressure from the Rock Furies. Heartsguard with me, Alexstrasza shouted. The battalion answered with a roar, filling the skies with their crimson wings. Below them, Ysera's verdant preservers took flight, ready to fall in behind and provide offensive and defensive support to the front lines. Nosdormu's temporal guardians had already joined the field, working under the scrums to slow the enemy and protect the red and black dragonflight should an attack come from below. The Bronze's Chronomagi would join the Spellweavers in providing range support, while the Onyx Reavers cruised high overhead, ready to drop through clouds of ash and devastate their enemies. As the Dragon Queen turned to the battlefield, she took a deep, steadying breath, stoking the fires in her chest. Her flights were outnumbered, but not terribly so. No doubt Iridikron had launched a surprise attack to deprive the Aspects of their allies to the north. No matter. Tonight they would break the Primalist lines and scatter them across the Dragon Wilds. Bajans and Imistraza, flight leaders of the Heartsguard, flanked the Dragon Queen on her right and left sides respectively. They would serve as her bodyguards while she led the battalion. On your signal, my queen, Bajan said, giving Alexstrasza a nod. Alexstrasza bared her fangs. Tendrils of ruby flames curled around her lips. Her blood burned hot and adrenaline blazed through her veins. She did not love fighting for fighting's sake the way Farak did, but it still sent a thrill through her every scale. With a hard beat of her wings, she leapt higher in the air, shouting, For the Broodlands! For Valdraken! A great cheer rose behind her as she trumpeted thrice. 2 short blasts and one long, warning the Iron Scales that the Heartsguard would perform a dive and replace on the Primalist's front lines. A second trumpet echoed over the battlefield, acknowledging Alexstrasza's orders. The Dragon Queen climbed higher, followed by the Heartsguard. With an elegant turn in the air, she dived toward the front, whirling to avoid an oncoming volley of lightning. In the next breath, she sped over the Iron Scales' heads and rammed into the Primalist's line. Imistraza tucked her wings and slipped beneath the Dragon Queen, spitting fire at 2 magma talons, taking aim at the Queen. Bajans descended on 2 stone scales on Alexstrasza's right side, tearing into them. The din of the battle became visceral. Alexstrasza felt the bony crunch of the Primalist's front lines as the Heartsguard fell upon them. She sucked in a breath. Crimson flames exploded from her maw in a wide cone, pushing the Primalist back as her Reds re-established the front line. The Iron Scales fell back. In the distance, Neltharion shouted, Flank them from the west! Go! The Primalists surged forward, their ranks broken, wild. Alexstrasza rolled sideways to dodge an attack from a magma talon, slashing out as she spun. Her talons sliced to the front of his throat. He dropped. Roaring Bajans collided with 2 Gale Strikers from above Alexstrasza. Bones cracked. On instinct, Alexstrasza rocketed upward, spiraled, then dropped on her attackers with a snarl, slashing, gouging, and biting. Even with their greater numbers, the Primalists could not hope to best an aspect. Alexstrasza took no joy in killing, no matter how proficient she might be at it. She mourned every life that met its end on the battlefield, dragon, draconid, and Terrasek alike. She hated the screams on the wind. She hated how suffering permeated the very air around her, but most of all, she hated that the only way to stop it was to cause more suffering, more hostility, more pain. Stars began to fall from the sky, streaking through the clouds of ash and striking the Primalists. Golden streaks of fire whizzed past Alexstrasza, bright as the noonday sun. Bright bolts of moonlight sliced through the Primalist scales. Ysera and her verdant preservers called upon the heaven's strength to provide offensive support for the Dragon Queen's battalion. As the Black Dragon shifted south, Neltharion and the Iron Scales managed to catch a regiment of magma talons off guard, surrounding them and striking them down. Spellweavers blinked over companies of Gale Strikers and Wind Weavers, barraging the Primalists with arcane missiles, while the Bronzes swept past, slowing their enemies' counterattacks. The Onyx Reavers fell from the skies, hitting their targets on the front lines with exacting precision. To the north, Nosdormu and his Chronomagi formed the rear guard behind Levarian and the Earthen Bulwark. The Bronze's Temporal Guardians fought on the front lines with Levarian, targeting the enemy with time dilation and providing a steady stream of healing for the Aspect's northern flank. The Dragon Queen stood in awe of them all and what they had wrought. Even Viranoth's legions had not achieved such coordination at the height of their power. She would not allow her flights to fall this day. They had fought too long, too hard, and with too much heart to fail now. Alexstrasza twisted in the air, knocking a pair of Rock Furies away with her tail. Despite the danger, the Primalists came in droves, seeking to overwhelm the front lines with their numbers. The Dragon Queen exuded an aura of ruby light as she fought, imbuing her forces with courage, healing, and strength. Slowly, the flights began to push the Primalists back toward Harrow's Deep. The Primal Dragons could not stand against the fury of all 5 flights, especially without the strength of an incarnate on the battlefield. Alexstrasza had no doubts that Iridikron monitored the battle, for Harrow's Deep and its surrounding peaks continued to rage. The volcanoes filled the sky with thick, unbreathable ash that blotted out the stars. Even as the battle grew bloodier, the Stone Scale did not join the fray. Coward, Alexstrasza thought, striking down another one of his magma talons. A chorus of agonized shrieks tore across the mountains, a collective exclamation of grief. Alexstrasza looked west. In a flash of lightning, she saw that Neltharion had Oxoria the Matriarch in his talons. With one sharp jerk of his head, he snapped her neck. Oxoria's children screamed as Neltharion dropped her corpse, diving and swarming the black aspect. He disappeared in a storm of wings. "Neltharion!" Alexstrasza cried. The Primalist took advantage of her moment of distraction, surging forward to surround her. With a growl, the Dragon Queen leapt to them, headbutting a Gale Striker with her horns. The crack of its skull resonated up her spine. Bajans pulled a second primal dragon off her back, while a third hooked its talons in her shoulder armor and tried to stab her in the neck with a wing talon. Alexstrasza rolled to shake the dragon loose, and Ymastraza snatched it and tore out its throat. The wet gurgle of its shredded windpipe made Alexstrasza's stomach turn. The Dragon Queen could not see Neltharion through the fury of the front lines. All she heard was the earth-shattering boom as another mountain peak exploded, this time along the southwestern ridge. A fountain of fire erupted along their southern flank, shooting massive chunks of rocks into the air. The projectiles tore through the iron scale ranks, shattering wings, breaking bones, and knocking nearly 20 dragons out of the sky. The Dragon Queen shrieked as the flames of their lives were doused. The mountain ridge to Alexstrasza's right shattered next, spitting another volley of stones into the air. Nosdormu was faster, or perhaps he had simply manipulated time. A cloud of shimmering sand swirled through the dragonflight's northern flank, halting the stone's trajectories. With a roar, the Timeless One wove a ribbon of golden light around his talons, then stretched it taut. The stones in the air went sailing back to their mountains, forming their peaks anew. Golden sands glittered along their surfaces to seal them against the stone scale's fury. In the west, Malygos surged to the front line. He set up a series of glimmering arcane shields, defending the weakened iron scales from the Primalist onslaught. From behind the Red's lines, Ysera ordered her healers to shift south. Still, the Earth Warder did not return. Panic flickered in the Dragon Queen's chest, especially when the Onyx Reavers streaked from the sky, plummeting deep into Primalist territory. How had Neltharion gotten so far behind enemy lines? Malygos started shouting something about supporting the Reavers, and an entire company of spell scales blinked away. "Bajans, lead the guard," Alexstrasza said. The flight leader nodded, ducking into her place as the Dragon Queen ascended over the battlefield. She took care to stay with Crystal Straws and the Ruby Flamebringers, but not so far back that she fell into line with Ysera and her Greens. From north to south, the Primalists surged along the front, moving forward in wave after endless wave. The volcanoes continued to spew lava, washing the entire valley in hellish orange-red light. Quakes raced beneath the ridges, shooting additional volleys of stone at the Aspect's flanks. The Dragon Queen considered pushing the front lines higher and out of range of the volcanoes, but the ash fell like scalding black snow at greater elevations. Overhead, the Primalist Gale Strikers whipped the ash into an angry, lightning-laced storm. Alexstrasza looked southwest. The Earth Warder fought his way back to the front line, his scales and wings glittering with the spell scale's shields, his attacks quickened by the Temporal Guardian's time magic. Malagos's arcane bolt struck from the sky. Neltharion slashed with such fury his talons blazed with the brightness of a forge. With Neltharion behind enemy lines, the Primalists had redoubled their efforts trying to break the iron scales while their aspect was under siege. A combined host of magma wings and rock furies now assailed the front lines, with more Primalists shifting from the center of the field. Lightning from the Gale Strikers rippled through the ash clouds overhead as the first sets of bolts arced through the sky. Malagos lifted one forefoot, protecting the black dragons with a sparking domed shield. In the east, Alexstrasza realized that the earthen bulwark no longer rallied around Levarian, but around his second-in-command, Stoltria. Whether Levarian was injured or had fallen, Alexstrasza could not say. The bulwark had sustained fewer losses than the Iron Scales, but even their ranks looked lighter. The battlefield teetered on a talon's edge. If the southern volcanic eruptions continued, they would ravage Neltharion's battalions. Alexstrasza needed to relieve the Black Dragonflight and order them to seal the ridges before the mountains claimed more lives. The Iron Scales line bent inward to the south. Warbringer Rava, Ridicron's favorite commander, smashed between the Iron Scales and the Heartsguard, taking advantage of a momentary weakness in their defenses. The Primalists surged into the breach, pushing it wider. Alexstrasza could not afford to wait. Either she acted decisively or the Primalists were going to separate the Iron Scales from the rest of her forces and flank the Heartsguard.
"Crystal straws!"
She called, trumpeting 2 short blasts and 1 long to the Ruby Flamebringers.
"With me!"
Vermilion scales shimmered overhead as Alexstrasza dived from the Primalist wing leader on the front line. A glittering golden shield wrapped itself around her as she plummeted, her sister's protective magic, and lunar fire struck Rava's vanguard, smashing through scales and clearing Alexstrasza's way. The Warbringer snarled as Alexstrasza fell upon her talons, flashing. Her attack glanced off Rava's stony flank. The Warbringer rushed forward, headbutting Alexstrasza in the chest to push the Dragon Queen back and knock her off balance. Alexstrasza's armor caught the brunt of the blow, but the force shoved her into a pair of iron scales. She recovered in a wing beat, gaining altitude over the scrum. All around her, Ruby Flamebringers fell upon Rava's rock furies. Crimson fire twisted around their talons and burst from their maws. They fell into line beside the embattled iron scales, halting the Primalist onslaught. The Onyx Reavers descended from the ash clouds to defend the flight's wings from above.
"You cannot win, Dragon Queen!"
Rava shrieked, baring her fangs.
"You and your cursed flights will die here on the fields of Harrow's Deep."
"Do you think I will lose to you?"
Alexstrasza snapped.
"You are not even an incarnate. How can you hope to stand against an aspect when not even Viranoth could best me?"
Rava roared and the volcanoes erupted in concert with her. Rocks rained from the skies. The Primalists on the front lines joined her until the whole of the valley trembled with the sound of their voices. Beneath the front lines, a glowing crevasse opened on the ground floor, winking open like a massive eye.
"You forget the stone-scaled fights with us,"
Rava said, gesturing to the rumbling peaks with her wings.
"Even now his power surrounds you on all sides."
"And yet he is too cowardly to stand beside you,"
Alexstrasza hissed, setting her talons alight. Using one of Farok's own tactics, Alexstrasza drew a deep breath and unleashed crimson flames upon Rava. She lunged through the fire, crashing into the Primalist. Shrieking, Rava snapped at the Dragon Queen's neck, but Alexstrasza grabbed Rava by the ridges of her head, sank her talons under Rava's jawline, and twisted. The torsion snapped the bones in the Warbringer's neck and shoulders, and her eyes rolled up into her head. Alexstrasza felt the life leave the Primalist's body. Though she took no joy in the act, Alexstrasza was glad to have saved those in the Zealot's path. Well, there goes his leaders. The Dragon Queen dropped Rava's corpse, watching it crash into the magma that bubbled from the chasm in the ground. A quake raced through the valley floor, making the lava bubble and churn. No doubt, Eridikron knew that 2 of his 3 wing leaders were dead. Oh, he's got 1 left. The rock furies on the front lines scrambled back as the Dragon Queen turned her gaze on them, tumbling into another one to escape her fury. Into one another. "Push them back!" Alexstrasza shouted to the Ruby Flamebringers who surged forward. Drawing a deep breath, she launched herself into the air, then swooped over the Iron Scales' front line, breathing her healing flames over their ranks. Ymastraza flew in her wake, adding a second gout of fire. As Alexstrasza doubled back, her dread rose. Neltharion was not on the field. The Earth Warder no longer fought Oxoria's brood behind the Primalists' lines, nor had he returned to lead the Iron Scales. Garion still flew at the Iron Scale's head, roaring encouragement at the dragons around him. Has Neltharion fallen? Alexstrasza thought, pulling back behind the ruby flamebringers. No. No, if an aspect had been struck from the field, she would have known. A death on that scale would have struck her heart like a javelin, sure and sharp. Then she spotted the Earthwarder hovering over one of the volcanoes on their southern flank. Magma spouted on either side of him, silhouetting his dark frame. He reached out one forefoot, issuing a command that shook the mountains to their roots. At first, they exploded with greater fury, shooting geysers of molten lava into the air. Glowing cracks appeared in their stony flanks. The power of their eruptions reverberated through the air and pounded on Alexstrasza's eardrums. Massive slabs of rock sheared from the cliffsides, cascading into the valley below. She thought the mountains themselves might shatter entire. Alexstrasza's eyes widened. Was this why Alexstrasza had charged into the fray alone? Had he sensed that this was the final attack that Iridikron held in reserve? An eruption so powerful it would strike both armies from the skies? Perhaps the matriarch would have prevented the Earthwarder from interfering with Iridikron's plans. Neltharion roared, and the sound matched the volcanoes in its strength and fury. His was the voice of cracking stone and shaking earth, of a rage that burned so hot that it threatened to crack the world in two. He lifted his 4 feet and began stretching them apart as if wrenching the mountain stone from Iridikron's grasp. Even from this distance, Alexstrasza could see him straining, his wings beating wildly, eyes flashing. One by one, the mountain's bright throats darkened. The rumblings ceased, and Neltharion disappeared in a cloud of ash. The Dragon Queen released a breath while the Iron Scales cheered and fought on. Upon seeing the earth bow to Neltharion's command, the Primalists on the western front scattered in terror. Rava's forces in the middle of the field bowed in, bereft of a leader, and in the east, the Rock Furies fled as ribbons of Nozdormu's golden sands danced through their ranks, making time shift and slow for their forces. The Primalists hung on for another hour, perhaps 2, before their remaining wing leaders signaled the retreat. As cheers erupted from the ordered on the field, Bajans and Garion bugled the advance. The dragonflights would scatter the Primalists to the winds and clear the way to Iridikron's keep. Alexstrasza watched them run with dispassion, unable to feel even a hint of victory, for the horrors of Harrow's Deep still remained. Okay, so that was a big chapter, but what we did was essentially accomplish the war part. It's kind of like the third book in like Lord of the Rings. Like, the war battles are fun and epic, but they're actually not as fun to read or watch in a movie as smaller, more intimate. I mean, like, just think about, would you rather watch, you know, the fight, the battle scenes from Lord of the Rings, or like John Wick taking on a group of mobsters or whatever? It's more fun to see. Or what's more fun when you're watching those battles, the overview, or like seeing Legolas jump and, you know, shoot 3 men with 1 arrow or whatever. So now we still have 3 chapters left, and it's going to be actually 2. Oh, that was 26. We have 2 chapters left. Well, that's why so we probably have one more, the second half of the climax, where we get into, because that was a ton too. That was like 20, almost 25 pages of the 50 we had left. So we're pretty good. We have 27-ish. So we should, what we read it just now was almost as much as the entire remaining book. So I don't think we'll have a chapter that's as long as this, but yeah, we've got to have the finale, and then we got to have a wrap up. Because if you look at the table of contents here, that's it. There's a dedication and an acknowledgement, and that'll take us off some pages too, but there's no epilogue. All right, so we have another episode in the pipe, 5x5, and I thank you all for tuning in. You guys rock, and I'll see you on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft. So that's actually what I'm going to do. Oh, crud. I'm talking, you guys caught me. I instead of turning off the thing, I started logging into this, and you hear me planning the next one. That's what I'm going to do later.